Last Concordia, and I want to thank the Office of the Concordia for selecting this topical here this afternoon, and also thank the Minister, Eoghan Murphy, for coming in to take the topical. And the significance of this, I believe, Minister, there's three areas I'm going to outline to you that I believe is adding to and contributing to homelessness and people ending up unnecessarily homeless or being able to access the services that you have put in place to help people and prevent them from being homeless and to help them get into some form of semi-permanent to permanent accommodation. And some of these issues that I'm going to raise, I believe they'll need a policy change from you or your department, or else maybe a letter of approval to the local authorities. In this case, I'm speaking about Kildare County Council because the constituency I represent is Kildare North, to maybe make this more clear, give them maybe more flexible, and to assist in a positive way, which, remember, everybody in this House wants to do, is to prevent people going homeless and help them secure a roof over their head, if it's not through local authorities' social housing allocation, through private rental accommodation. One of the first areas I'm going to touch on is in relation to the homeless HAP and the place finder, which you put in place to assist people in finding a private home to rent. And at the moment, once you get your notice to quit and you present to the Kildare County Council or any other local authority, obviously then you are going to find a home so that you don't end up homeless. Right now, we're finding is that you can't actually access that deposit or upfront deposit until you're very close to your eviction date or your get-out date, which means it's leaving it extremely difficult for people to find a home with that shorter notice. That could be maybe 3 to 4 weeks away from their eviction date, because obviously properties in Kildare North, like anywhere else, is very difficult to find through the private rental market. So the need as long as possible to try and source private rental accommodation. My view would be, from speaking to different groups about this, is that when somebody presents to the local authority with a notice to quit, which normally might have 3 or 4 months notice, in some cases it might even have 2 months notice, that they're going to aggressively go and try and pursue a property so they don't end up homeless with their family. At that point, I believe they should be able to access, when they come back and prove that they have found a property and already have confirmed to the local authority through the homeless section that they are actually going homeless and their notice to quit is in order with the statutory guidelines, that they can then access that deposit and month's rent to assist them find an alternative home, whether it's a month away from their eviction date or whether it's 3 months away from their eviction date. Because when you bring it close to the eviction date, it's making it far too close and far too tight to try and find a property, and then they're going to end up in a hotel. And that can be, maybe in some cases, I know in Kildare at the moment, they're going to hotels in Carlow and Portlaoise, which isn't very practical if you've got a family with children that's going to school or people that's trying to work. So I suppose they need all the time they can get, and they need the supports they can get to try and find alternative accommodation. Also, in relation to the 30% disposable income, Minister, I can understand where that calculation comes from with the department, so that when they pay the rent and pay the top-up, that they must have disposable income left to live, and that's acceptable. But the difficulty is at the moment, and I've raised in this House before, the HAP payment with the 20% discretion, still there's a gap between that and the current market value of rent, and I've asked if that would be increased temporarily while waiting on supply and stock to come into the market. But in the absence of that increase, what you have at the moment is there's a gap to be made up between the HAP payment and the actual current market rent for these families who's trying to find homes. They're getting letters of support from their family. It could be parents, brothers, sisters, from a reliable source who's in full employment, but to help them acquire a home and to help them obviously pay the balance. But unfortunately, local authority in Kildare, under the current policy, are saying they're not able to accept those letters in some cases unless they can get nearly bank statements and letters from their employers to confirm their permanent employment and they can support their family member to pay the top-up. That's adding to huge distress and concern for families, because it's hugely difficult to get a property. If you're lucky enough to get the property and you're getting support of the family to do the top-up, that should be allowed if it comes in with a strong letter of support, and putting them to the other needless tasks of getting the personal details from the person who's given them that support, I believe, is unwarranted. Thank you.
4 minutes.
Thank you, Dáil Éireann, and I would like to thank the Deputy for raising this issue, and I want to acknowledge the hard work and dedication that he as a Deputy has given to this issue, and I know that he has because we've been in contact in relation to HAP and homeless prevention measures on a number of occasions. and he has also worked with my staff on this in terms of bringing different concerns that he has had over the past number of months. He has concerns about the terms and consistency of the application of the homeless HAP in his area, and I do hear that. We know from the housing assistance payment as it's operated to date that because it is flexible and it is immediate housing support, and because it's now available throughout the state, it is playing a vital role in housing eligible families and individuals. And currently there are 40,000 households having their needs met via HAP, and over 21,000 landlords and agents who are in receipt of HAP payments. As the Deputy knows, the rent charged for HAP accommodation must be within the limits set down for the household type in a local authority area, and HAP tenants pay a weekly rent contribution to the local authority based on their income and ability to pay. The HAP rent limits were increased significantly in July of 2016 by up to 60% in some areas, and the Government has also provided flexibility to each local authority to agree to a HAP payment up to 20% above the maximum rent limit where it's necessary because of local market rent conditions. The increased rent limits, together with the additional discretion available to local authorities to exceed the maximum rent limit where necessary, are allowing HAP households to find suitable accommodation and willing landlords. And at the end of the second quarter of this year, excluding households that were accommodated under the homeless HAP arrangements operated by the Dublin Region Homeless Executive, 21.3% of households nationally were benefiting from the additional discretion, and in those cases the average rate of discretionary payment was 15.7% above the relevant rent limits. And I can give in a further reply more detail for there to the Deputy. In addition to the flexible and immediate housing support set out above, a significant dimension to homeless HAP was the establishment of the Place Finder service, which the Deputy referenced. Homeless HAP is a targeted support for homeless households who may find it difficult to secure HAP tenancies, and under the Place Finder service, the local authorities can appoint new dedicated staff to assist individuals in emergency accommodation to find appropriate long-term housing solutions. The Place Finder service has been in operation in the Dublin region since 2015, and the option to establish the service was made available to all local authorities from January of 2018, and it was taken up by Kildare earlier this year. It is a matter for each local authority to determine the appropriate deployment of the Place Finder service based on local needs, including the point at which a household will be directed to the service. I understand that many local authorities are focusing on those households who are already in emergency accommodation, assisting them to transition into their HAP tenancies. The Place Finder service recognises that for a certain number of people, particularly those already in emergency accommodation, sourcing property and securing a tenancy, including the financial constraints around deposits and advance rent, might be very challenging. The provisions of the Homeless HAP scheme provide local authorities with the discretion to assist homeless households by providing a deposit to secure property and paying up to 2 months advance rent. This discretion was provided as an exceptional measure for exceptionally challenging circumstances, and as such must only be applied where necessary. To broaden the provisions of advance rent and deposits is contradictory to the principles of the HAP scheme and could undermine the careful checks and balances that are in the system to ensure the best use of public funds. That said, the Deputy has been engaging with my department on this matter, and I do hope that he will be able to have further engagements where he can bring to light more specific issues that can be then examined, given what he has raised in the Dáil today. The Homeless HAP scheme has successfully been utilised by the DRHE across the 4 Dublin local authorities since February of this year, supporting more than 3,600 households to date. More than 1,600 new homeless HAP tenancies have been set up so far this year, and that goes for people who are at risk of homelessness or coming out of emergency accommodation. So it's a very important support for people in this crisis. We monitor HAP data on an ongoing basis. I have a report here for the Deputy, which I think he'll be interested to see, as well as other key information relating to the private rental market. And I'm satisfied that the current HAP rent limits and the flexibility to exceed them in certain circumstances provide local authorities with the capacity necessary to assist households in securing rented accommodation that meets their need. But again, I am grateful to the Deputy for raising these particular concerns, and I hope that he will engage further with me and the Department over the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Oireachtas. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Lasky Corey, and thank you, Minister. Yeah, and to that end, I'm meeting some of your officials tomorrow, as far as I know, here in Dublin, on these 3 particular issues, because I think that if there's clarity brought about them and some flexibility, it will assist positively. And I'm not criticising the measures at all. What I'm saying is that the homeless HAP and Place Finder was put in place in Kildare County Council earlier this year, and this was a debate we had, I think, just before the summer recess, is a welcome measure, and anything we can do to help people and prevent them from going homeless is welcome. The issue here is the timing of them being able to access the upfront rent and deposit. That's the key here, and that's the point I wanted to distill out with you. At the moment, policy is saying, department officials are saying, and the council is saying that you have to be very close to your eviction date before you can access that upfront deposit and rent. And what I'm saying is that is contributing to homelessness, because you won't get a property the day you go out looking for it. And if you're going looking for it before you can access that fund, you're competing with someone that maybe has the money in their back pocket. So if someone has notice to quit, and that's a statutory document that obviously meets the criteria, well then they're virtually on the home stretch of being homeless unless they get another home, because they've got notice to quit to get out in 2 or 3 months. Unless they can find another home, they're going to be going into emergency accommodation. And look at the cost of that, and we want to avoid that. So what I'm suggesting is that they can access that payment once they get their homeless, their notice to quit, immediately, to help them to get another home between that and being evicted. And in relation to the 30% disposable income threshold, and in relation to that letter of guarantee, the problem is, Minister, is that, like it or not, for most families they need a 3-bedroom semi-detached house. I know it's relating to family unit, the HAP payment, but rather than get into that calculation here, we don't have time. That equates to, in some cases, a 3-bedroom semi-detached house with a 20% discretion. HAP in Kildare is about €1,250. The current market value of that is €1,500, so there's a top-up needed. So we need to be able to get the local authorities and the department to agree to accepting the letters of guarantee coming in without forensically post-morting them, which means it's leading to further problems. And the final issue, just if I can have a moment, is that people that's actually on the housing list that's in HAP units at the moment, it could be in them 1, 2 or 3 years. Those houses comes up for sale, maybe the landlord or landlady's under financial pressure from banks or whatever the personal reasons are. Is there any possibility that the department could engage with the local authorities to ask them to purchase those units? Because what happens is they're not purchasing the HAP units. Those families end up coming out looking for alternative accommodation. They can't maybe access it due to lack of supply, and they end up going into hotels, not even within the county, but maybe in a neighbouring county or two. So that is a problem. I'm just wondering if some clarity can be brought to that, and if some approval can be given to the local authorities, that if someone is in a property like that and the property has been sold, that even though they're getting the HAP payment, that property can be purchased either by the local authority or by the department agencies. Thank you, Minister.
Final response, Minister.
Thank you, Lance, and thank you, Deputy. I want to welcome the fact that the Deputy is recognising that HAP is working, but of course it can be improved, because not every Deputy in this House does recognise the huge support that HAP is giving to people either who were at risk of homelessness or coming out of emergency accommodation. Literally tens of thousands of people up and down the country. And some people, for ideological reasons, refuse to recognise that. So I do welcome the comments from the Deputy. In relation to the 3 specific points that you raised, on the timing issue, and so far as when someone can access the deposit in the first month's rent, I think we should look at that. And so I want you to engage, and I'll tell my officials to engage with you into looking at that to see what's going wrong there, because we don't want to, for administrative reasons, be putting people into distress when they shouldn't be. In relation to the second point that you raised around the gap and letters of comfort, let's look at that too. Now, obviously, we need to make sure, because we're talking about taxpayers' money, that all appropriate checks and balances are in place. And I don't want to be taking away discretion from local authorities who are on the front line of the services at the coalface, might have a better understanding of what they're dealing with themselves. But of course, we can look at that. In relation to the third point, though, about the department potentially buying homes or allowing the local authority to buy a home that is being HAP'd at the moment and might be sold, the difficulty there is value for money. The difficulty there is cost. It may not be value for money for the local authority actually to purchase that home, and that's a call that they'll have to make. But it's based on costs at the time, their own build programme, other acquisition programmes that they have, prevailing market rates and everything else. But I do appreciate the Deputy for highlighting these issues, and we can engage positively on them through my department over the coming days and through the meetings that he is having. I'll give you this official report that we have that's been prepared for the Joint Oireachtas Committee tomorrow, but just to give you a couple of quick figures in relation to Kildare. Total active HAP tenancies, 1,667, 355 of which were set up in 2018. It's roughly 14 a week. So HAP is helping people in your county, which is great, and we want it to help more. The average rent that's been paid in Kildare by the local authority to the landlord is €916. Which is above the national average, but of course it's Kildare, it's very close to where many people want to live and work. And then if we look at the use of the discretion, which is a point that you also raised, Deputy, about 42.6%, so almost half of people who are getting HAP are getting the discretion, so they're getting some uplift above the HAP rates. But in terms of the amount of the uplift they're getting about, on average, 14.1%. So when you talk about the gap, even those who are coming in are not needing to go the full 20%, most of them. So there is still plenty of flexibility, plenty of headroom within that 20%, notwithstanding the point you raised about letters of comfort and the additional payments and things like that. So we can look at those things, but Happy is working. Anything we can do to help it work better, I will absolutely welcome. Thank you.